Peace be with you. I usually make videos about Christianity and Islam, but today I wanted to make a video about power of language. Just through life and just watching the daily events unfold and how governments manipulate people made me realize that language is the most powerful weapon anybody has. For example, the conflict in Ukraine, that just started, right? And people are very animated about it, at least people in the West. They want to help, they want to, do all that, which is the right thing to do. When we see people in distress, emotionally, we want to help them. This is just something we're conditioned to do, with one exception: if those people are evil, if we are made to believe that they deserve it. So, for example, Nazis losing the Second World War, nobody gets really up in arms about that. People think that's a good thing. So when we're talking about information, what really is happening doesn't matter. How that information is framed is what matters. The only thing that matters in a conflict, for example, like the one in Ukraine, is who the media tells you is the good guys and who the media tells you is the bad guys. And everything else gets filtered through that prism, and then it doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter what happens to the Russians at this point, right? Their dead soldiers don't matter. Even if they had dead civilians, it doesn't matter. And I'll provide some examples. The only thing that matters, and let's say if Ukrainians used any weapons available to them against any target, they would be justified, because this is how this information is framed, and there's no way you can go against that. Once you frame this information, anybody who tries to go against it is viewed as a terrorist sympathizer, aggressor sympathizer, aggressor excuser, and all that. So then language comes into power again, to where you see that you can't even speak out in support of something that may not be true or wrong. When we use this kind of language, aggressor, terrorist, and we frame conversations like this, that gives complete power to whomever is disseminating information. So I'll make an example between Ukraine and Palestine. For people who don't know about Palestine, what really happened over there right after World War II, a bunch of refugees, Jewish refugees from Europe, these people were suffering, no doubt about it, but they had no right to go over there. They were illegal immigrants, and they started just going over there massively. The people that were there, they objected to that. They rebelled. There were some riots. Eventually, a conflict started, and the people from Europe got weapons and help from Western nations, and they did to the Palestinians what the Russians are doing to the Ukrainians right now. So they took over the land. They expelled a bunch of people, and when they took over the land, there were genocide. I mean, there were war crimes. There was ethnic cleansing. They would destroy whole villages, and they killed a lot of people. So what Russians are doing to Ukrainians right now actually pales in comparison. It's really nothing. Even though now, as you see, our politicians calling it war crimes and all those things, it really pales in comparison to what was done to the Palestinians and what continues to happen to the Palestinians. Let's suppose that Russians take over Ukraine. Let's suppose they build a wall around Kiev, and then they forcibly move people from the surrounding countryside and surrounding towns into Kiev, make it a very densely packed area, and then move in ethnic Russians all around Ukraine, what is Ukrainian territory right now, and then they give these Russian immigrants more rights than the people who are native to the land, the Ukrainians. If that happened right now, all of us would think that that is a travesty to justice, that is insane, and we would oppose it unless our government told us not to oppose it, which is what's happening with the Palestinians. So the Israelis did all this. They did exactly that. They cleansed the land from these people. They evicted a bunch of them. They locked another in a ghetto called Gaza. They built a wall around it. In the West Bank, the settlers who are there illegally have more rights than the Palestinians. Palestinians live under a military law, while the settlers, who are not even supposed to be on that land, still live under the Israeli civil law. They get to do whatever they want. They're supported by the military, and it's a ongoing slow ethnic cleansing. But we are not outraged about that because the media is not telling us. Actually, what the media is doing quite the opposite. They're telling us that the Palestinians are the aggressors and the Israelis, who are in the similar position as the Russian aggressors in Ukraine right now, are the victims. Let's say all this happens in Ukraine. The wall is built around Kiev, and there's a densely packed ghetto there, and Russians have more rights than the ethnic Ukrainians. And now Ukrainians start to shoot missiles at the Russians. You have Ukrainian guerrillas, right? Like you had guerrillas in the Warsaw ghetto, right? If you had these people, what would our media say as things are right now? What would our media say? So, the Ukrainians shoot a few missiles at the, Russians outside of Kiev. The media would say that these people are continuing to defend themselves and will call them heroes. While when this happens in Palestine, when these people are sick and tired of living under this occupation every time they're called terrorists. And because that information is framed like that, because nobody can support a terrorist. You can't support a terrorist. It's just simple. So they don't, the facts on the ground doesn't matter. Human suffering does not matter. The fact that there are bombs killing people don't matter. Because the media can manipulate all that information easily by framing the conversation into the good guy and the bad guy. And there's more to it. Another thing the media does is selective presentation of information and choosing what to highlight. That is another way to manipulate people. Let's say a bomb falls in Iraq during the aggression on Iraq, the Second Iraqi War, which is a completely unjustified invasion under false pretenses, right? They did not have any weapons of mass destruction. They did not have any connection to Al-Qaeda. As a matter of fact, Saddam Hussein suppressed that kind of people, religious extremists. But they got invaded anyway. And what did our media say? Was there outrage? No. Were we talking about war crimes? No. We were talking about that we are the liberators, or our government is the liberators, and they are the villains, and therefore whatever we do to them is justified. That is how things work. That is how people are manipulated. So, what happens when a bomb falls on a school in Iraq and kills 30 children? What do we see on the news? All we see is collateral damage. We try to avoid civilian casualties. There were terrorists in that area. We had to take care of them, and unfortunately, collateral damage happened. There is no dead children. There's no pictures of dead children. There is no interviews with their families. There is no crying people. The report is completely devoid of emotion. So, that kind of reporting is designed for you to lay back and sit back because there is no emotional reaction. It is completely designed to suppress any kind of emotional reaction that you may have on the sight of dead children and their crying families. But now in Ukraine, if the Russians do it, and this same suppression happens in Israel, they don't show you the dead Palestinian children after the Gaza ghetto gets bombed. But in Ukraine, a school gets hit, let's say it gets hit even by accident. What is the report? The Russians are war criminals. And not only that, they put the families of those children on the TV. They're crying, they're giving the children's names, all that. I mean, we've seen that type of manipulation even with domestic issues here in America. Whenever they want you to sympathize with somebody, they put on their grieving families and give a whole expose on the background of these people. So when that happens, when they want you to be mad at Russians, they want you to be willing to support them with your money and maybe even with your children's lives, if it comes to that, to go to war for them or against the Russians, then they show you the dead children. Then they attach the emotion to the act so they can provoke an emotional reaction and get us to act. Mind control is not that hard. It is really not that hard. You frame the information into two categories, good and evil, and everybody wants to fight evil. That is a human nature. None of us want to think about ourselves that we're evil. So you frame the conversation like that, and that's it. Then whatever happens, the facts on the ground do not matter. Human suffering does not matter. And then what you do is you highlight information or suppress it. How you not to suppress the facts. You don't have to suppress the facts. You can still present the facts, but all you have to do is present it in a certain way. If you don't want people to get emotional, don't paint pictures. And if you do want people to get emotional, then show them the pictures. And it's that simple. That is how mind control works. So we are all controlled at all times. This is why commercials work. This is why propaganda works. Even with commercials, beer, alcohol is a poison. but they create a commercial that connects the emotion of happiness to the product, and until you start to connect those two together. If they connected a commercial showing a cirrhotic patient, and this is the only thing you ever saw about alcohol, and just showing cirrhotic patients vomiting blood and having being all bloated and having to have fluid drained from their bellies because they're in cirrhosis, if that is the only thing you saw on TV about alcohol as a child, you would never want to try it. You would not be intrigued. But because they attach the emotion of happiness and fun to it, you do. Marketing and propaganda are the same thing. And we are all being mind controlled at all times. So it's very, very difficult to see through that. So I just wanted to make this video to try to kind of explain to that, because the power of language is so immense that once you master it, and once you are able to understand how to manipulate people, and then you own the platforms for mass dissemination of information, that's all you need to control people. This is why they block each other's news media, because they don't want you to hear the other side, because that diminishes the effect of the domestic propaganda. So the Russians are blocking the Western media, and Western media is blocking the Russian media, because they don't want us to see the other side, because regular people have nothing to gain from any kind of conflict. The only people that have to gain from conflict is the rich people and people in power. People that don't have to dig trenches, people that don't have to shoulder a firearm. But when they want us to do that, they use language and information to get us to comply. And I just wanted to kind of raise awareness that this is actually what is happening, because there are people in Russia and in America and in Ukraine who just want to live their life. But the people, the powers that be, are able to effectively manipulate them and get them galvanized to actually act in a certain way, in a way that their rulers want them to act. And that is tragic, because they gain nothing from it. So if people really want to understand international war truly for what it is, I would recommend a small booklet called War is a Racket by Major General Smedley Butler, who was one of the most decorated Marines in the history of the United States Marine Corps, and he will tell you all about it. I also recommend you read the George Washington's farewell address. He gives the pitfalls of how people are manipulated, how people can be manipulated, and by what, as a part of his farewell address. I will also recommend you read 1984 by George Orwell. He gives, it's a story, but it is about power of language and how language is used to manipulate people. And the last book I would recommend for people to read is The Animal Farm by George Orwell. And in it, it's also like a fictional book, but in it gives us a warning that if we are not careful, we always become the evil that we're trying to stop. So that's it.